Again, good morning. Thank you for coming today. My name is Andrew Plato. I'm the President and CEO of Anitian Enterprise Security. And today we're joined by Tom Hinault from Sophos. He's the North American Data Protection Specialist. And we're going to be talking about mobile security, particularly in the context of the healthcare industry. So again, thanks for joining us. Just a quick introduction on myself. I'm the president of Anitian. I've run Anitian for about 20 years now. We are an information security consultancy based in Portland, Oregon, but we work nationwide. Our business is exclusively information security services and solutions. We do penetration testing, we do compliance auditing, we're a PCI QSA, we obviously work in the healthcare industry, and we do work with some key partners on security solutions, including Sophos, who's one of our partners for mobile device management, endpoint protection, UTM, etc. I'm going to go ahead and introduce Tom at this point and let Tom talk a little bit about himself and about Sophos.
Thank you, Andrew, and thank you, Anitian, for including Sophos today. My name is Tom Hinault. I'm a product specialist for our data protection and encryption product lines. That's a smaller part of Sophos' larger portfolio. We're on the vendor side of the house, providing data protection in different forms, from antivirus and anti-malware to UTMs to email encryption, laptop and hard drive encryption. And today we're going to focus on mobile device management, MDM security, and how it applies to healthcare. We're talking a bit today, like Andrew, focus on some of the broader issues and more educational issues on regulatory compliance that can help you. And then we'll talk a little more specifically later in the presentation about some Sophos specific deliverables. Hopefully that'll be interesting that you'll want to stick around for that part too. Thank you for having us.
And thank you, Tom, for joining me today. So our agenda for today is we're going to start out with just kind of a quick overview of really what the challenges are for going mobile in the healthcare industry. And although we're going to be talking about healthcare, I would note that this actually applies to a lot of other industries as well. Although healthcare definitely has some unique challenges, I think those challenges are, some of them are universal and some of them are unique. Then we're going to spend a few moments really talking about what's the impact of the HIPAA regulations, HIPAA or HITECH, now HIPAA Omnibus, on mobility. We're going to have a few slides on that, and what are some of the critical components of HIPAA relevant to mobility. Then we have a good kind of section on what are some of the key solutions for mobile security. And this is going to really look broadly across the spectrum of not only just technologies but also practices, and not only just mobile device management, but really the broader view of your network and your infrastructure. Then at the end, we're going to have, and it is optional, Tom's going to give us a good review of Sophos' mobile device management and their encryption solutions and some of the capabilities that they have in this space. I would note there's a number of things that are not going to be on the, in this presentation. So first off, we're not going to be talking about EMR implementations and the specifics of doing that. We're not going to be making ridiculous promises of making everything perfect and great and easy and simple. I think if any of you have ever worked with Anitian before, you know we're not really into the whole frothy, sensationalist nonsense kind of stuff. We are down to earth, practical, pragmatic security people. Two other things that we're also not going to talk about is really we don't have a bunch of horror stories, and we're not going to bombard you with statistics. And there's a reason for that. We walked into this presentation or this webinar with the intent that I think most of you in the audience, you already know mobile devices and mobile platforms are a risk. You've heard the horror stories. We all know the statistics. We've all read the breach reports. We've all seen all that data. We're going to go into this with the sort of premise that we all accept that there's a serious risk here. We all know that what those risks are to some extent, and we don't need to kind of rehash the, oh my God, this, look at what happened to this healthcare provider. They lost a bunch of records and got hurt. Well, we've all heard those stories. We know they're terrible. So let's not just rehash them. Let's get right down to business here and talk about how we're gonna fix these problems. Okay. Okay. So in the very beginning here, I want to talk about really what some of the key challenges to being mobile in a healthcare environment. And when our analysts, myself, and some of the other guys here at Anitian really kind of think this issue through, we boil it down to really 5 primary issues you have to deal with: people, data, apps, access, and compliance. Those 5 components really need to kind of govern the whole process. They're what you kind of need to think about. And I'm going to walk through really the challenges or the benefits and challenges of each one of these quickly. So first off, we have sort of the people side of this. And we always like to start with people because in our view at Anitian, we believe sort of mobility begins and ends with people. We actually believe all technology kind of begins and ends with people because that's why we have technology. So in this case, I think we all kind of know what the benefits are. I mean, mobile devices, smartphones, laptops, tablets, they let people work better. It creates an environment where your practitioners, where the caregivers, they can interact more easily, more naturally with people. It's a less intrusive. You know, you're not mired down to these wired desktops, etc. And more importantly, let's face it, users are demanding this. I think most of you in the healthcare industry, you get the doctors coming in and you know, they want to connect their devices up, and they pretty much run the show in a lot of these places. They want it. They, you know, the doctors, the nurses, the practitioners, they want this access. They demand it. It's part of how they're going to give care. The challenge really is, do you trust these people? Do they have the ability to really make sound decisions about threat and risk? And I don't know about you, but most of the healthcare people out there that I know, they often don't. And it isn't because they don't comprehend what it is, but it's because it's complicated. It's not their job. They're not sitting out there like us, you know, security practitioners, thinking about these things every day. They just want that access, and they need it. And they don't want to have to think about Russian hackers and malware and these kinds of things. The other aspect of this is, how are you going to handle these personal devices? How do you negotiate that space between, you know, it's my iPad and it's your data? Where's the fine line? And trust me, that's a difficult line. And that's going to come up more than a few times in this webinar. The next big challenge we have is data. How do we control the data that these users see? First off, they want it, they need it, and it's useful to them. If we can get data out to users on iPads or smartphones, they can make decisions faster, they can make better decisions, and more importantly, they can be anywhere within the environment or out of the environment to be able to make those decisions. But how do you protect that data? How do you control access to it? HIPAA is very concerned with data, and if you really get down to it, it's really almost all about data to some extent. And how do you protect it and how do you control it? And what do you do when stuff is lost or stolen? The next challenge or the issue we have to deal with is applications. Mobile devices and have apps, right? We all have, you know, pretty much all of us here today probably have an iPhone or an Android, or the few of you who still have a BlackBerry out there, you know, good for you, keeping up the faith. We all have apps, right? Yeah, you know, I have Angry Birds, you have, you know, we all have this stuff. People want it, they're used to it, they know how to use this stuff. Well, how do you control that? How do you prevent the malware? Where's that balancing act, right? I've got my Angry Birds, right? But I need that, you know, that app to get my data. How do we balance between those two and allow users to have their Angry Birds? And of course, the big issue kind of at the end of all of this is compliance. How does compliance impact mobility? And it's tough. The challenges here are complicated. Crafting a BYOD strategy to align with HIPAA and meaningful use and high-tech or HIPAA Omnibus now, how do you do that? And how do you prove compliance? This is really the basis for the challenges for healthcare. And these challenges are like I said, they're complicated. The data is very sensitive. I mean, you're talking about data that nobody wants out in the environment. Nobody wants breached or leaked. A single breach can be disastrous. I mean, we've all heard the horror stories. You know, the breach happens and it costs them millions of dollars. I mean, we've heard that a million times. Most of you know who work in healthcare, you know probably better than even I do. Your networks are getting really complicated, really diverse, and really large. With everything kind of going on in the healthcare industry right now, there's a lot of investment going on to make things more efficient and more profitable. That's good. That's good for all of us, right? But that adds complexity, and that complexity makes this problem even worse or even more difficult. The other problem we really have is that mobile devices and apps and such, they're maturing very rapidly. Think about 5 years ago. I mean, we didn't even have iPads. I mean, iPhones were still kind of goofy. There was no Android. This market is rapidly maturing, which means that's great for all of us, but it also means the risks are rapidly maturing. And lastly, of course, there's really no one way to do all this. You're not going to be able to go out and buy one product and secure it all. It's going to be an intermix of product solutions, architecture, and many things. And that's what we're going to talk more about. Let's take a second, though, and let's talk about the impact of HIPAA High-Tech, HIPAA Omnibus now on healthcare. And I just want to kind of briefly touch on this issue because it's a kind of issue we can really get lost in quickly. First off, I did this quick thing to just so we all are aware, what are the threats and then what's kind of the impact to those threats. So on the left side here, we've got some of the common threats to mobile platforms: loss and theft, personal entanglement. I love that word, entanglement. Malware, phishing, toll fraud, etc. And then the impact: reputational damage, legal liability. Health and Human Services is now doing audits. Those audits can have fines. Those fines can hurt. One of the breach reports that just came out recently cited that the average cost of a record loss of is $197 per record. Well, you breach 10,000 records or 100,000 records. We can all do math. We know what that number is. That's a big number. Okay. We know the breach costs are considerable. If it's not just the regulatory fines and penalties, it's the lawsuits. And if it's not just the lawsuits and civil action, it's all the direct costs of response, forensics, notification, credit, and identity monitoring. And you need to be doing auditing to know that you're meeting the compliance requirements. So you need to make sure you're meeting privacy, security rule requirements of HIPAA, and then also the new breach notification aspects of HIPAA. So the costs here are considerable. We all know that. I did want to throw this in here because I know I said I wasn't going to cite statistics, but this one was probably the most interesting of them all. It's a very important pie chart, kind of in its Goofy's 90 colors here that we have. Really important piece of this is when you look at what is the leading cause of breaches, obviously the number one is theft and loss basically, so that red and blue, right? I mean, that comprises 60-some% of the leading cause of breaches. That's an important piece of information to keep in the back of your mind. Loss and theft should really be the driving force behind almost your entire mobile security solution or mobile security strategy, because that is most likely what you're going to experience. Russian hackers, APT, these kinds of things, interesting, worthy of investigation, but those are not the top things that cause breaches. So what has changed? Those of you who are in healthcare are probably still reeling from HIPAA Omnibus and all the details that have come down. Now, we don't necessarily have time today to do a full download of all the changes. We've done a blog entry at Anitian's blog. It's blog.anitian.com on the changes that have happened in the HIPAA Omnibus final rule here. So if you want to go to our blog, you can read that. It's from Stephen Swan, who's one of our senior consultants at Anitian. The key things that are really relevant to us is this breach notification changes and the need for business associates to encrypt PHI or ePHI. I'd say those are probably the two biggest changes that affect mobile security. On the encryption side, simply put, it's now required that all business associates, basically all covered entities, which includes not only just the healthcare provider, but any contractors or subcontractors, business associates that work with those, they have to encrypt data now. That wasn't always the case. There were ways to kind of slip around that in the past. Well, there's been a real firm rule change there. They've got to encrypt. They've got to protect data. It applies to everybody. The other big change that happened was this breach notification changes. So this is a really significant change in HIPAA, is that if there's any suspected breach, even just suspected, organizations are required to conduct a good faith effort risk assessment and determine whether data was actually breached. What that really means is that if there's a suspected breach, you're going to have to sit down and conduct an honest, kind of formalized risk assessment that says, this is the threat, this is what happened, here are the controls we have in place to mitigate that threat, what is the final outcome of this particular threat, what's the risk to an actual breach here, and if the risk is significant or serious, then you're going to have to do breach notification. If you have the right controls in place, encryption, mobile device management, etc., then you can make a reasonable argument that we have controls to protect this, therefore the breach either didn't happen or is highly unlikely that it happened. The HIPAA security rule does have some specific safeguards. Now, one thing that's important to note, HIPAA doesn't say anywhere protect mobile phones. There's no specific directive to protect mobile devices. What it talks about is data and access. And these are really the key criteria or key issues of HIPAA that affect mobile devices, which is you have to have access controls for PHI or ePHI. It has to be limited to authorized personnel. You have to enforce least privilege. You can't just open up EMR systems or anything that contains PHI to just anybody on the network. You have to audit the activity. You have to have log monitoring, application monitoring, network monitoring. You have to have audit procedures in place to keep an eye on all that. You're required to have integrity controls to prevent improper alteration of data, whether that's either on the device or that's back at the server. And of course, you have to have transmission measures, transmission security measures to protect this data when it traverses really any network. This is the stuff that really affects mobility. It actually affects almost your entire network. But these are the aspects of HIPAA that are going to mandate or require some form of mobile security strategy and policies thereof. So how do you stay compliant? Well, this is a slide with a lot of data on it, and I'm not going to necessarily read each one of them. But each one of these is really a key piece to the compliance puzzle. And again, this puzzle of compliance there's a lot of intricate little pieces. And I'm just want to talk about a couple of these here. And then we're going to go into our next section, and we're going to answer these questions. You're going to see how these kind of fit together. But the first thing I would note is that HIPAA requires you to do an organizational risk assessment. Now, most of you have probably already done this, and if you haven't done it, you really need to get to it. You're required to do sort of an overall organizational risk assessment, and that's supposed to drive your HIPAA or high-tech or HIPAA Omnibus now compliance program. You got to do those two things, and that really needs to drive everything else underneath it. And part of that organizational risk assessment needs to address mobile security. A lot of our clients and a lot of the healthcare organizations we've worked with, they've done risk assessments in the past, but they haven't updated them to current, to deal with the fact that mobile security now. So you're going to have to go back and update that and get that data in there. And out of that, you need to, of course, develop your compliance program. The rest of this is really key technical controls. And again, we're going to kind of get into these in a little more detail. One thing I would note here, and you're going to hear me echo this more than a couple of times, which is you got to encrypt everything. If it moves, encrypt it. System, laptops, tablets, data, whatever. If it's moving around, it's got to be encrypted. Tom, did you have something you wanted to add to this slide?
Please. Here I am in my primary deliverable in my role being around the encryption and encrypting data everywhere, exactly what you said. But jumping back to your first point about risk assessments Risk assessments, and that's one of the reasons why we looked at companies like Anitian to help our clients do risk evaluations, but I'd also suggest you look at this from a business perspective. Our core deliverable here is going to be around the technical controls and enforcing protection of data. But if you look at risk, another look at that is insurance. There's probably someone else in your healthcare organization that owns things like business insurance and malpractice insurance and things like that. Someone whose job it is to worry about risk mitigation. They may not be involved with IT. They may not deal with IT much at all. By the same token, they probably have a different budget. So as you look to implement tools and realize that the regulations are forcing your hand a bit, there may be other parts of your business responsible for mitigating risk that maybe will help commit some resource for you that you hadn't thought of. So just a non-technical thought as we jump forward on the technical pieces.
That's a very good point. I would emphasize the need for also the IT groups. And, you know, I suspect a lot of you who are listening in today, you know, are technical people or have at least a technical background. It is very important that you form good relations with the people running sort of the risk side of this, be that the internal audit or if you have a HIPAA compliance team or a group or what have you. And making sure that whatever you're doing at the technical level is really aligning with the risk, and that more importantly you're feeding back the data to them, because if they don't know you've implemented encryption and some of these technologies, or they don't even know that they're possible or capable or whatever, then they're not necessarily going to be willing or able to commit resources. But if they know about them and understand the value of them, then number one, you'll help them be able to get better risk data. And number two, they may be able to help you get the resources you need, be that funds for investing in technology, people for the help, what have you. So getting the two sides, the technical and kind of the organizational or risk side, getting on the same page, that's important. We don't want to dismiss that. Okay. So next section we're going to talk about really the solutions for becoming secure and for mobile security. And in this section what we're really going to do is answer the key questions of how you're going to do this. What is it that you need to do? And again, those of you who've worked with Anitian know this is really kind of part and parcel of the way we like to work. We're big on this is what you got to do. This is your action item to make this stuff work, because that's kind of our whole practice, rubber on the road information security consulting. So first off, the big question, we hear it all the time, what policies and procedures do we need to have? First thing you need to do is you got to sit down, develop a strategy. This is really important for almost anything you do in IT, but it's definitively important for mobile security. That is, define what your organizational strategy is going to be and get executive buy-in to it. And when we talk about a strategy, any of you have sat through my Angry Birds management presentation, this should look really familiar, because that presentation is all about how to build a strategy. Which, if you haven't seen that presentation, I'm sure we're going to do that as a webinar. Again, stay tuned, and there's also copies of it available on our SlideShare. But what a mobile security strategy really is it's about defining who has authority, what resources you have or need, what is your real business need here, defining key business justifications. And these don't have to be long-winded, blathering kind of reports. It can be as simple as one sentence, you know. HIPAA requirements mandate that we secure ePHI. We have ePHI out on tablets. It needs to be secure. That's your business justification right there. And it doesn't need to be any longer than that. The point of doing is that it gets the business on the same page of this is why we've got to do these things. You can establish requirements in this. What is it that your mobile device management or mobile security, what is it that it's got to do? Now, for most people, that's probably going to be a common set. But maybe you have unique requirements. That's the point to document them. What is your BYOD strategy? How are you going to deal with personally owned devices? Are you even going to deal with personally owned devices? I have a lot of opinions about whether you even should. I think a lot of us in security often tend to go to the position of don't let personal devices on the network. But I know that's not realistic in every place. So you need to define when is that acceptable and when is it not acceptable. How are you going to make people aware of these new programs? Who's going to be responsible for that awareness, and what is it that you're going to tell them? And of course, what are the policies you need to write? And that really doesn't have to be anything more than just a list of the policies, who's going to work on them. And while we're talking policies, you do have policies you need to write. The first thing you really should get focused on is incident response practices, because above everything else you do, you need the ability to respond to a breach quickly, efficiently, rationally, and in a very formalized manner. That is going to make a world of difference between a breach that causes a little bit of annoyance to the organization versus the breach that causes millions and millions of dollars in whatever, legal fees, fines, etc. Incident response procedures almost should be the first thing you focus on, although there's others you're probably going to want to work on simultaneously. Specifically address mobile security incident. Train staff on exactly how to respond to breaches of any kind, but specifically mobile security breaches. And when I say train staff, I mean everybody. This is not something you want to hide on a shelf somewhere far away. Everybody in the IT organization needs to know what to do if a mobile phone's lost or stolen. There should be a clear, clean, well-known, well-documented, well-tested practice so that when that happens, it's just click. Your organization just goes into IR mode and solves the problem quickly. You know, you don't have to get 29 different approvals to wipe the phone. It's wipe the phone. And that's why these procedures are so important, and that's why we put them first. Get those rock solid. A mobile security policy is kind of your next step, and this is going to be kind of a collection of policies, and you may already have this data in other policy documents throughout your organization. I would note Sophos is a great template on their website. I created a little bit.ly link for it. So if you want to copy that, or if you just type in like Sophos Mobile Security Toolkit, you'll go right to their website. It's a good start. It's got the basics in there. It's something you certainly can read and then add that to either your acceptable use policy or maybe some other policies you have. Again, the key here is you want to be addressing specific things about mobile security. What are the rules for personal devices? How and when will devices be reset or wiped? And more importantly, and this is something we advise a lot of our clients to do, define classes of employees and the types of access they have and the types of security procedures that will be implemented should there be a loss or theft. And when I say classes of employees, I don't mean 14,000 different classes. I mean like high security, medium security, low security employees. High security, any report of loss, boom, your device is wiped, that's that. Maybe lower security people who don't have access to ePHI, they lose their device, you cut them off the network, you don't really care about wiping their phone. Those are the kinds of differences you're going to define in this mobile security policy, which again I would note may actually exist in other documents. Then you're going to have a mobile security standard, and this is where you're going to define the specific technical requirements for mobility in your environment. The platforms you're going to support, the MDM rules you're going to have, the technologies you need to integrate with, all the key details of what your mobile security infrastructure is going to look like. Set those standards, get management to agree to them. This will make the process of determining which mobile device management platform you want to buy a lot easier. Because once you know what you need it to do, it becomes a piece of cake figuring out which ones can do that. So our next big question we need to answer is, how do you control access? How do you limit access to these devices and the people on them? Here are some of the key things you need to do. I'm not necessarily going to read through each one of these. I want to just focus on a couple of key ones that we at Anitian think are really vital. The first one is one that has become really everybody kind of needs to do this, which is implementation of a core firewall. Now that's kind of almost a presentation in and of itself. What is a core firewall? How does it work? What does it do? What that really means is an internal segmentation device, something that can break up the interior of your corporate network and provide different zones of security and control. And the great thing is with advances in next generation firewalls and or UTM devices, which as you know are the same thing. That's another one. That's another issue that's on the Anitian blog. There's no difference between next-gen firewall and UTM. These devices have now really delivered the ability to not only segment the network, but implement a whole host of security controls, DLP, intrusion prevention, application control, inline antivirus. All of this can be done with a core firewall. And it's completely pick and choose. So you can have some networks that are high security, where you're going to have DLP and application control, and other networks that are low security, don't care, minimal rules on them. Core firewalls give you a lot of that capability to do that, and because UTM and next-gen firewalls are now so powerful and can operate at line speed, the implementation of core firewalls is now not just a good idea, it's now a reality, and quite frankly, it's actually pretty affordable now. The other key thing I would note here is, of course, implementation of mobile device management. That's pretty much a gotta-have nowadays, and of course, Sophos will show you their product. Of course, there's others on the market, but that's pretty much a must-have in the mobile world. The last one I would mention, too, here on this list is this last bullet item, application delivery frameworks. These are extremely powerful. And anybody who works with Citrix already knows this, because Citrix is kind of the best known in this space. But there's a lot of others out there. VMware has some. There's other technologies that can do this. I also saw a product at RSA this year called Remotium. They actually won the RSA New Company Award. Really interesting product. I'm not even really sure they've released it yet. Last time I checked, they were still in beta on their product. But what these are is they are technologies that run on your mobile phone and actually can deliver applications within a controlled, confined, encrypted environment. That's extremely valuable. Citrix is, I think, probably the leader in this space. But what that really does is that rather than running the app locally and having the data locally, you're running that Citrix or that Remotium or whatever that environment is. People connect in, and these environments tend to give you a lot more control over who gets access, what access they have, and more importantly, what data they have. And if the device is stolen or lost or whatever, that Citrix client or Remotium or whatever that client is, all that data can be wiped out just like that. So there's really no threat of the data leaking out of the environment. Application delivery frameworks are really, really valuable in the mobile world, and I would encourage anybody who's looking at mobile security, at the same time you're evaluating MDM, you should either already have this or it's something you should really be thinking about. How do you protect data? Well, you're going to notice that a lot of these answers are the same ones that were on the previous slide. It's the same kinds of things. And you'll notice that application delivery framework is right there again too, because that helps protect data. But there's of course a few new ones, and the one that of course we've said many times is you got to encrypt. You got to encrypt everything. Drives, laptops, systems, smartphones, tablets, backup tapes. If it moves, if you can pick it up, you got to encrypt it. In fact, I'd even encrypt the things you can't pick up. Yeah, I like to make the joke, people say, well, should we encrypt that? Yes. Well, yes, just encrypt it. Don't ask the question again, just encrypt it, okay? But keep in mind, it's not just about encryption. You have best encryption technology in the world, but you still got to manage encryption keys. You still need the controls of access. You're still going to need other things around that beyond just encryption. And the other controls that are necessary. Of course, you need to be able to wipe devices, and you need to be able to wipe them immediately, and you need to be able to do that regardless of whether it gets the message right then or there. Some of the problems with some of the lower-end mobile device management solutions is the remote wiping is just not foolproof. I can testify already that Sophos' mobile device management wiping is pretty bulletproof. We've tested it out on more than a few devices, and it works. So. But Tom can tell you more about that. Database monitoring is another thing I would mention. Again, has nothing to do with mobile devices, has everything to do with your core database. Database monitoring, something like an Imperva or a Centrigo, or there's a couple of other technologies out there that are really good in this space. Valuable technologies, because not only can they enforce rules around that database, but they can monitor who's querying what. And if I'm going to break into your environment as Mr. Hacker, believe me, I'm going after your database, because that's where the goodies are. That's what I want. And if I can get on that database and start pounding away, pulling tables and getting data, that's what I want as a hacker. Database monitoring, if it doesn't necessarily stop that from happening, it'll definitely let you know that it did happen. And that at least gets you ahead of the curve on any kind of breach notification. So it's another technology that's key to the bigger picture of protecting not just mobile devices, but your environment as a whole. How do you control apps? You create your own app store and you don't allow jailbreaking. Those are the two key things you've got to be able to do. Jailbreaking, it's all bets are off when you have security. And trust me, I understand. I'm a nerdy guy. I love to jailbreak. I think it's fun too. Believe me, I'd have a jailbroken phone if I could too, because it's fun and you get to do more interesting things. But the reality is, you should not, under any circumstances, allow any jailbroken devices in your environment at all, even a little bit, because every mobile device on the market, if it's jailbroken, all the security controls are pretty much off the table. I don't care what the jailbroken sites tell you, or, oh, but you can do this, you can do that, whatever. Apple iOS is actually one of the worst, because within Apple, there's a lot of really good security controls. Apple has actually one of the most secure operating systems out there. In fact, a lot of the guys at Anitian now carry Apple iOS, Apple devices. But the minute you jailbreak that device, all those security controls are gone. So no jailbreaking, and MDM can enforce that. Network controls, like on a UTM or next-gen firewall, can block dangerous apps. One of the great advancements that's happened in the UTM next-gen firewall market is this application control, the ability to not just detect ports and protocols, but know the difference between Facebook and, you know, some proxy tunneling program that's going back to Russia. That's important. Again, application delivery framework, I already mentioned that. That's another key part of controlling apps. I would mention one last piece, which is mobile malware protection on Android. And why do we pick on Android? Because that's where the malware is. There really is not any malware on Apple yet, although there's been a little bit. But Apple, just by the mere nature of their operating system, is not as vulnerable to malware as Android. So if there's malware, it's on Android right now, and that's why we need mobile malware there. And Sophos actually has a mobile malware client for Android. How do we make all this work? Well, so that's the sort of our last big question in all of this. And then I'm going to hand this over to Tom to walk through his to Sophos. Sophos' MDM solution. Let's remember something important here. HIPAA doesn't say protect smartphones. I don't think the word smartphone is used anywhere in the legislation. I'm not even sure the people in Congress who wrote HIPAA even know what a smartphone meant when they wrote it. It doesn't say that anywhere. So you have to keep that in mind. What it does say is, and we're somewhat paraphrasing here, is you got to protect data, and if you disclose it, you fail. Disclosing ePHI is epic fail, and that's where the fines, the litigation, and the problems are going to happen. So what do you got to do? You got to know where your data is, and you got to know who's using it. You need to automate all of your enforcement activities as absolutely much as possible. You know, we have a rule here at Anitian. We talk about it, the 4 a.m. problem. If the security of your organization depends on a person sitting at a desk at 4 a.m. to make a decision, you have a system that will break. In fact, it's basically broken already, because no human being can make decisions at the speed of networks or the speed of hackers. It's impossible. So it doesn't matter if you have a guy sitting at a desk somewhere in some data center in Virginia watching your network. He's never going to be able to respond quickly enough or reasonably enough to really protect you. You need to automate. You need technology to make that decision for you, and then the people to basically come in after the fact and clean it up and figure out what happened. Remember to look to the entire infrastructure, too. When you're talking mobile security and mobile device management, this is not just picking the right MDM. It's about the bigger picture, UTM, next-gen firewall. It's about endpoint control. It's about database monitoring. It's about application frameworks. You've got to go the big picture on this and think the whole thing through, because just throwing an MDM solution out into your environment, that's going to maybe protect a few, do some good protections, but without the rest of the infrastructure supporting and enforcing and helping with that, it's not going to be that valuable. Remember I mentioned about creating classes of users. I think that's important. And lastly, train your users about these threats and good practices. Okay? Tom, did you have, at this point I'm going to hand it over to Tom, but I would ask, Tom, did you have anything you wanted to add to the slides we've talked about? I know I kind of jumped through them quickly.
That's a lot of important points, and I agree with you. I love your 4 a.m. rule, relying on a human. The way I typically position that or ask our IT people when they're dealing with internal users and pushback is I want to take I didn't know and I forgot off the table of reasons why data gets breached. That's a really horrible reason to face a lawsuit.
Yeah, that's actually a really good way to think of it, too.
And Sophos comes at this from a vendor perspective and providing technologies that support that. I'm going to go from the macro level that we've been discussing and get a bit more micro towards some MDM deliverables in particular. But as a transition, the question that we often bring up is, how does this sensitive information come into your environment? Where is it stored? How does it go back out? And at what point do you lose control? Well, the data coming in, there's mechanisms for that. And the data storage, you're going to leverage things like EMR. You're going to leverage Remotium and Citrix, the tools that Anitian team's been talking about. But the stuff that doesn't end up there, the stuff that's on the fringes, something like an image from an X-ray or an Excel spreadsheet, how do you make sure that all those other places it can be protected? That's where vendors like us who do full disk encryption, network share encryption come into play. How does the data get transmitted to your business partners, to visiting nurses, to your lawyer, to private practices? How do you make sure that the data, if it goes on a USB stick or a laptop, enforce encryption? Do content trigger DLP on email attachments? Now, you don't care when Andrew and I set up lunch, but you really care if we send a medical record. Putting a type of automatic enforcement to take the I didn't know and I forgot off the table is what we suggest you look towards. How's the data come in and out? Where do you lose control? But then if you start looking at MDM, particular, jumping down to this platform, we realized that the position you're stuck in, I did a presentation on MDM, ironically, for a bankers conference in the Midwest, and somebody asked me, well, would you allow BYOD in our environment? And I said, well, no, even though I was talking about how to secure it, how to control it. I wouldn't let people in a bank bring their own device. I'd bank issue them. I'd still want MDM to control it. But we get the fact that in a clinical environment, if a surgeon's the rainmaker and he or she's generating the revenue, and they got the new iPad for their birthday or holiday or whatever, you're going to be stuck. If you have to say yes, how do we say yes in a way that you can control the information? So the gotta-haves when you look at MDM, this is where we'd start out. Managing controlling devices. Let's not support everything. I remember my StarTech phone. I loved it. It was small. I liked the fact that it folded. The new smartphones don't fold. But do I want to be controlling that and allowing email or something like that? No. Let's get a reasonable set of devices and let's control access. Let's not forget the basics. Does it have a password? Is there a reasonable password? Let's make sure that type of stuff's turned on and you can enforce that. Applications. The Angry Bird story came up. The Angry Bird Star Wars, there was actually a fake version of it 2 weeks after it came out. Things like that. So let's make sure that the apps are the real ones, be it something that's a that Citrix client, or maybe you've got a client you want to put in your own corporate app store for your EMR application, or even general use stuff or business tools. Let's make sure they're the real ones, so they're not just grabbing anything. Enforcing compliance is around some of the issues that came up before. Let's make sure the thing isn't jailbroken or rooted on the Droid side of the house. Let's make sure that the apps are current, your security is turned on, the encryption on the local device is there. For the most part, you're going to look to leverage the encryption that's in the mobile OS. Now, the vendors usually do a pretty good job as long as you turn it on. Layering on encryption on top of a mobile device, they usually don't have the processing power for it. So you want to leverage the tools that are already there. It's going to be more efficient. Let's just make sure it's turned on. Email access. Let's face it, you might go and save a document down to your actual device, but the primary place corporate information, non-personal information is going to be there is in your mail account. Let's control access to that and have the ability to rip it off and tear it off. You win the lottery, good for you. The rest of us have work to do. Take your personal phone and call your friends. Let's get the work mail off of there because you're not going to care anymore. Or if you know it's stolen. This piece actually comes into, I don't like using this phrase, but I think it fits, selling the idea of MDM to your internal end users. It is a touchy subject. What do you mean? This is my device. This is my Droid. Well, if you can position this, frankly, as a personal benefit to the employee, think about what's on your personal phone. Pictures of your kids, all your friends' contact information, your mom's phone number. If your device was lost or stolen, wouldn't you want that controlled? Wouldn't you want to make sure there's nobody creepy ended up with your kids' pictures or your kids' soccer schedule? That's what's on mine. I'd like to know that work provided me a device where I could remotely lock my phone or geolocate my phone if I misplaced it, or wipe it if I knew I'd left it in a cab and I don't have to wait until Monday morning to do it, particularly in a 24/7 environment like you guys work in. But if I proceeded to be a personal benefit for me, and oh, by the way, I just avoided a HIPAA lawsuit while I'm at it, but I was worried about my kids, not about my work. I can still make that win-win for both sides. Where do we take that up a level? Excuse me. So you go from the gotta-haves in the market, and I think you're going to find most of the key players that are reasonably mature are going to have that. And by the way, this is a really messy market. Something like 82 companies applied to be in the Gartner Magic Quadrant last year, and we made it through. We're one of the ones that did. But even for an immature market, those gotta-haves most are going to have. The mobile security that Andrew brought up earlier, the ability to anti-malware and do some encryption security on there, let's make sure that those pieces are in place as well. So what I'm actually talking about there. The MDM to allow the BYOD, but mobile security I'm breaking into two buckets. Antivirus for Droid and encryption. A lot of nasty stuff we're seeing on the Droid side because there's so many open stores. Things like an app that can take control of the digital camera and uses the tilt thing that can tell when you tilt your phone and it changes the orientation of the screen. It can sense that the device is moving and take control of the camera and take pictures and try to take a picture of something on your desk, like maybe a bank number or a password, or map out your actual physical office using your own camera. That's a scary thought. Let's make sure that type of stuff is controlled. Make sure people are only buying apps off of a legitimate Google store, not off of just some freeware thing they found. And then encryption, particularly we're talking HIPAA regulated. So you don't feel like bringing your laptop. So you don't use USB sticks anymore. You like something like Dropbox or Ignite instead. Okay, let's take the I didn't know I forgot off the table. Let's encrypt the data before it ever gets synced up to the cloud. Let's make sure when you pull that down to read that chart on the train right home that it came down encrypted and password protected. Or if you emailed that link out to somebody, talked to you on the phone and said, hey, Andrew, I'm going to send you a copy of the presentation. The password's going to be Anitian123. And I mistyped the email address. It goes to the wrong person. Well, it's not a breach because they had access to my cloud storage, but they didn't have the passwords. They couldn't get into the file. That's what we're getting at there. Another thing you want to look at is mixed ownership. Corporate device, or you could think of it in this case as a hospital-issued device as opposed to a personal device. Let's split our example here. On the left-hand side might be something like visiting nurses. They need to access ePHI, they need the Citrus client, they need encrypted laptops, but maybe you're doing stuff with iPads or different forms and formats. You can make that more strict because it's your device. You know, it's the company's device. As opposed to, you know, if it is a surgeon's device, it is something that an employee at a high level is allowed to bring to the table. You may not want to have the rules locked down to that same level. So based on who you are in those different policy groups that Andrew was talking about, you can dial up or dial it down as need be. And make sure that that data is protected no matter where you grab it. So if you do use a tool like cloud storage, it was already encrypted and protected on the network side. Then when it's synced to the cloud, it's encrypted. Then when you grab it on your mobile on the train ride or use the web, the Wi-Fi at your patient's home, as a for instance, at your private practice, your access is controlled and it's still auditable. So what are we doing at Sophos in particular? Sophos' historical value add to the market's been antivirus, anti-malware. We've added these type of controls particularly to do virus scanning. Here's a free thing from us for taking the time to listen to the webinar today. There's actually free Droid anti-malware up on sophos.com on our free tools page. Take it for a spin. Put that on your Facebook page. Tell your pals. Totally cool by us. It's free. And frankly, we do it to get some name recognition in the market. But, you know, being the vendor we are, one of the things I like about working here, we're the good guys. You know, we keep the viruses out, keep the bad guys off your system. What we're doing here in our MDM platform is taking that from a personal choice to something you can centrally manage and centrally control. What's the frequency for your viral scans? Are you allowing people to put stuff on SD card? If so, are you encrypting it? Are you scanning the SD cards, making sure you check on the device? Putting in some anti-malware power on local device. Today, you know, Andrew mentioned there's not a lot of malware yet. I do say yet intentionally. On the iOS side, it's been pretty locked down. Make sure the thing hasn't been jailbroken, because right now Apple's not letting vendors like us interact with them at a level where we can put filters in place. We're negotiating with them, and other vendors are too. Keep the jailbreaking in place, it'll help. But Google's a much more open operating system, so there's a lot more threat. So use a tool like this. Oops, blew right by my slide. So with the mobile security, you're controlling this. You take it out of the user's interface and control. I'll actually show you the interface in a second. From personal control to have something you centralize, so you're managing and monitoring and you're maintaining compliance. You also have the compliance control right in this around applications in the store. So if it is jailbroken, you can tear their email off. If they go and turn off the encryption on their local device, you can remove email access, you can lock a system up, you can wipe a system. We also let you set up the security so that the user has control. If it is Friday night at 1 o'clock in the morning and you realize that you left your phone in the bar, now you can go home and use your home computer to lock a client up. You're protecting yourself and work while you're at it. One of the cool things about this particular approach that we've put in place around the anti-malware is we're also putting some web security in place. We realize that is a tricky place to go. So we want to make sure that the application controls is the place that it starts from, that you're looking at the scans, that you're putting scans and controls in place. And as I said, there's a little different approach. Ironically, there's more buttons on the free and the left-hand side. There's in the free version, the advisor, the geolocate, remote lock. You want to personally control that. Well, I want to enforce that. I'm not giving a choice in the managed version. I'll make sure that stuff's in place. And dial it up with the web security. This is a political slippery slope. This is if somebody starts going to something, a website that Sophos in our labs is classified as a known breach site. We don't want to be intrusive, and today we don't offer any usage reports. There's a debate internally if we're going to offer that or not, because it is a personal device thing. I suspect we'll end up doing it because enough clients are asking for it as an option. But today I'm not tracking where you go. You know, it's not meant to be intrusive, but if you do go to a website that we know that, hey, look, that's Angry Birds 33.3/malware. It's not, it's something that's got a malicious payload. We can block it or even close that browser session if the user keeps trying to do stuff that you think is inappropriate. Now, so it just enables you to dial up and put some corporate level control over a personal environment. we're still giving them the control. The user can remote lock their phone. They can remote wipe it if they know it's gone. But you take control of enforcing compliance in applications, enforcing passwords, blocking them going to known problem sites. Well, let's face it, even if you thought you were getting a free Angry Birds, if it was realized it was a threat, you wouldn't want to go there either. So we automate that type of protection. I think the MDM is a really attractive piece right now. It's getting a lot of mind share because people are looking to use these devices. Don't forget advice Andrew gave you and protect everywhere. If it can grow feet and walk out the door, encrypt it. If it's an open area, encrypt it. If you're not sure, encrypt it. And Sophos offers tools for that as well. USB encryption, hard drive encryption, network share encryption. But these are likely theft targets. They're interesting, they're attractive, people take them everywhere, and they don't think about them. Take the thinking off the table. Let's get rid of the I forgot and I didn't know, and protect them automatically. For Andrew and Kevin on the Anitian side, were there any questions stacked up for us at this point?
Yeah, I think we did have one question. One of the first ones that came through. And by the way, I would say, if any of you have any questions at this point, please feel free to type them into the little chat window down here, and we will see them, and I'll reiterate them to the entire group. So at this time, please ask your questions. But we did have one come through earlier. Somebody said, okay, we're talking about mobile devices and what have you. What about laptops? How do you protect or secure those? So I don't know, Tom, you want to take a shot at that?
There's a lot of different ways to do it. You can buy pre-encrypted hard drives, SED, self-encrypted drives. The various makers, Toshiba, Fujitsu, all the hard drive makers have, and you get them from all your main laptop makers, your Lenovo, your Dell, your HP. Those are a good way to go. They're fast and secure. The gotcha can be managing them in bulk. So the Sophos biased answer part of that is we can centrally manage the encryption of hardware encrypted drives as well as encrypt them with software ourselves. We'll do software-based encryption, encrypt the entire drive, password protect it, make it single sign-on so don't make the users miserable. Again, take the I forgot off the table. You might also look at Microsoft's BitLocker, another quality encryption platform you can get from the OS vendor, and the encryption is just fine. It's a situation where, again, it's not just the encryption, it's not just the math, it's how you manage it. Sophos, as part of our platform, will extend the management and control, extend the key control, extend the removable media platform support, extend the OS support beyond just the limited few where you can get BitLocker. We'll also improve the user experience and password experience if you are using BitLocker. So there's a couple ways to do it. But on all those platforms, absolutely encrypt them all. And to your point, Andrew, when I'm dealing with healthcare, also banking and finance, anybody whose business is somebody else's sensitive information, laptops and desktops, get them all.
Yeah, absolutely agree. It really gets back to that principle of you got to encrypt everything, and the risks are just huge. Laptops, mobile devices, USBs, like I said, if it moves, you got to encrypt it. But centrally managing it, getting it all into one common platform, that is where you're going to get the ease of administration. You're just going to cut down on the administrative overhead, which I cannot emphasize enough the importance of cutting down on administrative overhead of management of security, because it's real easy to go out and buy 29 different products, but I mean, I can tell you right now, I'd have a tough time managing 29. Us security professionals would struggle with that. So, the simpler, the more you can get your management centralized, unified, uniform, the better. So that's the benefit of centralized encryption and mobile device management and all these things, is that they're going to give you one common platform to work off of. That's why we're a big proponent of UTM and next-gen firewalls as well, because they unify you to a common platform and make the administration of that environment so much easier. And ultimately, that ease of administration means you're more likely to implement good, strong security controls, because you can actually exploit those systems to their maximum. So, Well, it looks like we've hit our deadline. It's 10. You know, we've hit the end point here. It doesn't look like we've had any other questions. So I'm just going to go ahead and close this out here and say, if you'd like a copy of the presentation, please feel free to email us at info@anitian.com. Please visit us on our website. Of course, visit Sophos' website too. I didn't get their link up here, unfortunately, but it's www.sophos.com. By all means, please stop by our blog. Sophos also has a really great blog. Their Naked Security blog is consistently one of the top winners of the Security Blog Awards, or you know, I see it win awards all the time, and it's frankly one of the blogs I follow very regularly. Great information. They're well known for it. They have great writers on there. And as always, if you have any other questions, feel free to contact myself. If you had questions for Tom, go ahead and send them to us. We can certainly forward them on to him. And again, we appreciate everybody joining us today. Thank you very much, and we wish you the best and have a good day.